Coin Center came out with a great article that dives into the infrastructure bill. Now, this has been in the news nonstop, especially in the crypto sphere, ever since we found out about the crypto provision tucked away in there that had these vague definitions about broker in there. But it turns out that's not the only severely problematic part of the infrastructure bill. So Coin Center dives into it. They look at section 6050, which requires counterparties to surveil each other even without an intermediary. So let's kind of unpack why this is an issue. I mean, the way Coin Center says, I'm just going to read their words because they really summed it up nicely. It's also to do with the Bank Secrecy Act. That it would basically say that cryptocurrency has to apply. Bank Secrecy Act would apply to cryptocurrency. And they say, well, the Bank Secrecy Act and its mandated reporting from banks and other financial institutions is a warrantless surveillance regime that hoovers up the banking details of every American, irrespective of any suspicion of crime, and hands that deeply personal information to law enforcement and intelligence agencies without any check or balance from the judiciary. And the whole reason why we are okay with this, or why it's deemed constitutional, is something called the third-party doctrine, right? So let's just explain that quickly before we dive into this. And Snowden's talked a lot about the third-party doctrine, about how the reason that the government can comply, can force, like, for example, telecom companies to hand over a whole bunch of information, for AT&T to hand over information about their data. It's the idea that as soon as we voluntarily trust a third party or another company with our data, then we're no longer in control of that. We've given that out, and so the government can force those other institutions or those other parties to give over that data. And so in this instance, they're saying, listen, because you're using banks, you're using these third parties, that data is no longer yours, it's the banks. And so they have the right to hand over that data. And of course, the banks all voluntarily comply because they get access to banking services by handing over all of this data. Now, sure, we could say that the third-party doctrine, which is terrible and needs to be overhauled anyway, applies to the banking sector. But what they then went ahead and did was they applied this to cash, right? Cash transactions that are peer-to-peer. And now they're saying with the infrastructure bill, this will apply to cryptocurrency. So any transaction that's over $10,000 in cryptocurrency, both parties will need to report on each other, social security numbers, all of the things mandated in the Bank Secrecy Act. And so Coin Center brings up the point and says, like, guys, it's literally called the third-party doctrine. And you're saying it applies to situations where there are two parties. Like, how is this constitutional? Literally, the only reason it's constitutional is this third-party doctrine. There are no third parties here. And so you're literally saying that people should be forced to hand over information about their peers or people they're doing transactions with when the government itself can't even get access to that information without a warrant. And yet we're expected to report on each other. So it's just kind of this complete perversion of the law. Now, this has been there have been, what's the word I'm looking for? Pushes back. My English is really good today. Appeals, that's the word. Appeals. There have been appeals to this where in the sense that it applies to cash in the past, but they never really got anywhere. I think they got to the second circuit or appeals and didn't go further than that. But Coin Center has said in no uncertain terms that they are ready to fight this. If they're applying this to cryptocurrency, they will take on this battle because this is unconstitutional and this should have been struck down as it applies to cash a long time ago. So kind of meaty stuff coming out of Coin Center. Adam, I'm going to throw straight to you for your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I'm not actually familiar with this particular clause yet, but it seems like I kind of need to be. The thing that this brings to mind immediately is just that the Constitution is a document that both empowers the government and then also places some pretty strict limitations on what it can or can't do. In the modern era, the Constitution has been recognized really as little other than a roadblock that prevents the government from doing things that it would like to do. And this seems to be another attempt at that, because to the extent that they do something unconstitutional, but they're able to actually do it and they're able to maintain it, then they can actually weaken the overall protections that prevent them from doing other things that they would like to do. So it's a very unfortunate continuation of trend here. It's really good that Coin Center was able to suss it out. And I'm not at all surprised that Peter Van Valkenburg is at the forefront of this. And I hope that they do, follow this case as long as it takes, because it is an important one. Jen?
Yeah, every time there's a new law or rule put in place in the space, things become more and more unclear. And I'm starting to think that this is happening on purpose. So part of this this new provision says that the reporting has to happen within 15 days. And so my questions are like, what needs to be included in that report? How does it happen? How is this report submitted? If I'm taking all of this personal information from you, Naomi, what are the provisions to make sure that I don't do something malicious with that information? How am I protecting your information? There are so many questions to be asked here if this were to be put in place that it's just confusing and frustrating all at the same time. But Naomi, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, well, and then I'll throw it straight to Adam. But one thing, quick answer is I'll say there are no protections, which is exactly why we see when the government mandates that banks collect all this information, they KYC everyone. We have all these data breaches. They put individuals at risk, and all this sensitive information is just spread across the internet. If there are like countless hacks of JP Morgan and every other giant bank. So there are no protections in place, and yet the government mandates that this sensitive information get collected. What Bitcoin solved was that you no longer have to collect this information in order to create a trust network where people can send money to each other. It was a revolution, and now the government's coming and saying, "Oh no, it wasn't that. This was this necessary evil. We actually like all the information, and so we're going to shoehorn that back into our model, and force you to keep collecting that information for us." But Adam, I'll throw that over to you.
So the thing that I think most upsets me about these types of things is that there are already so many things on the books that are illegal, that are not enforced. And this is, if it passes as they would like it to, will be yet another thing that is illegal on the books, not enforced, which then means necessarily that anytime we see it being enforced, will actually being selectively enforced, where really it's just being used as a pretense to go after somebody who they really already wanted to go after. And this was just kind of the most, convenient cudgel that they kind of have. So again, this whole thing really continues to take us down a very dangerous path in US law.
Yeah, I really hope the Coin Center is able to push back on this. And it is kind of shocking that this cash provision has been in place for so long. When it went to the Court of Appeals, this was 1991, and nothing has happened with it since. But crypto could be providing a new energy behind this, because there are a lot of people in crypto who are very unhappy with this. People should have the right to transact with other consenting individuals. So it's interesting to see where this is going to go next.